Shana Tova. Growing up outside Philadelphia, school trips were always to American Revolution historic sites. We'd walk Elfreth's Alley, where Betsy Ross stitched the first American flag. We toured Independence Hall and saw the chair of the rising sun, where George Washington presided over the Constitutional Convention. But my favorite stop was always the Liberty Bell. Back in those days, we could get so close to the bell, we could practically touch it, imagining the immensity of its sound and marvel at the prominent crack running down its front. The Liberty Bell tells two narratives. One is the story behind its text. The bell was commissioned for the 50th anniversary of Pennsylvania's Charter of Privileges, which established self-government and individual rights in 1701. Colony leaders wanted a biblical verse to inscribe on it, and they chose Leviticus 25:10 because it's the only place in Torah that references 50th anniversaries. The words "proclaim liberty throughout the land" were chosen for the bell because the next sentence in Torah deals with those anniversary observances. Overnight, however, the verse on the bell became a celebration of American democracy. Indeed, the bell made democracy happen. It summoned lawmakers to the Pennsylvania State House in the 1750s and 60s. Later, it responded to autocratic monarchy as one of the official bells rung on July 4th, 1776. A few decades later, the bell became an emblem for abolitionists and subsequently for suffragists and then civil rights activists. It even served as an early rallying cry for gay rights demonstrations in the years before 1969's Stonewall Uprising. But the bell doesn't just inspire equality. Its famous crack tells another story. The fissure reminds us that democracy is fragile and that it can become permanently damaged like the bell itself. This morning, I add my voice to those alarmed that the fissures in our democracy are actively widening. This isn't easy for me to raise because it will likely spark division in our politically diverse congregation, a diversity that I genuinely cherish. To those who disagree with my reading here, I sincerely hope you'll reach out in the coming days so that we can make time for your thoughts on this. Our synagogue and country are well served when we dialogue together. Our present environment is the latest iteration of a trend more than 65 years old. Pew Research recently released a study looking at the percentage of Americans who say they trust the government to do what is right always or most of the time, tracking those numbers from 1958 to 2024. Their data notes that trust in government peaked at around 80% just before the start of the Vietnam era. That number dropped precipitously during the Vietnam War and the Nixon administration. It peaked again at around 60% just after 9/11, and it has hovered at a dismal 24% since the 2007 financial crisis. So, long-term bipartisan distrust in government is one factor leading to our current situation. Another factor is the slow decline of our political center. A Gallup poll in 2025 notes, for example, that the percentage of Americans identifying as moderate has declined from an average of 43% in 1992 to 34% in 2024. In the last 30 years, that's 30 million more Americans who have vacated the center and embraced ideologies and values at the extreme poles of American politics. In the context of Israel, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove has argued that we have a Jewish responsibility to reclaim what he calls the sane center. His point applies equally to our domestic politics. He writes, "The sane center must reject the false binaries of the hour and refuse to let those who have embraced the ideological extremes define the field of play and terms of debate." Rabbi Cosgrove here articulates another longer-term trend not tied to any one party affecting the weakening of our democracy. Our fellow citizens and the politicians we elect have fled the center. The absence of a sane center has also contributed to the spate of political violence that grips our nation. Those on both extreme sides of the aisle ought to be sent back to school to study Gandhi, Dr. King, and nonviolent resistance. Because no political philosophy in a democracy can justify political violence to achieve its ends. As we will read on Yom Kippur morning from Deuteronomy 30, "I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day. I have put before you life and death. Uvacharta b'chayim. You must choose life." The actions of the current administration are pushing our already fragile democracy to its limits. We've watched as the government has deployed its power against the disenfranchised. The Torah cries out to us repeatedly, "The strangers, the ones who are different, who reside with you, shall be to you as your citizens. You shall love each one as yourself, for you yourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt." How can we hear that verse and not be concerned for immigrants and refugees, to be sure, but also for other populations, for women whose right to determine their own reproductive health has been systematically dismantled, for LGBTQ folks no longer protected against discrimination in the federal workplace, and more specifically, we witness with heartbreak a nationwide transphobia blocking trans people from access to essential health care. We witness, too, a persistent dysfunctionality between our three branches of government. When one branch fails to check another, when the basic legitimacy of elections is questioned, and when speech is actively policed, our democracy becomes undermined. On Rosh Hashanah, we are called to do cheshbon nefesh, to assess ourselves about who we were last year. We're also called to do a cheshbon nefesh of our country. Where has our nation succeeded and also fallen short? And how can each of us help restore our democracy in 5786? To do this work, I suggest three foundational Jewish values to give us a shared language as we grapple with our own assessments of how the country is doing. First, the principle of acharei rabim lechatot, which affirms that the will of the people and the authority that comes from the majority is the best way to govern. The idea is enshrined in a famous Talmudic story from 1,500 years ago. The matter concerned a heated rabbinic debate about the kosher acceptability of a certain oven. Rabbi Eliezer is convinced his opinion about the oven is correct, but his colleagues adamantly disagree. Eliezer is so certain he's right that he calls on God to perform miracles on the spot to prove it. And amazingly, God does the miracles Eliezer directs. God strongly agrees with Eliezer's position. But the rabbis insist that God no longer has a say in such debates. The community had constructed itself in such a way that the majority rules, not heaven. God and Eliezer are humbled. They accept that majority rule is ultimately the fairest way to lead. So, majority rule democracy is one Jewish value we bring to the table to assess how our government is doing. Majority rule doesn't mean a duly elected leader can do whatever they want. Millennia before the founding fathers debated checks and balances in Philadelphia, our ancient Israelite ancestors searched for a plan to curb abuses of power. Their ancient check appears in Deuteronomy chapter 17, where God and Moses explain the proper way for an Israelite monarch to rule. When he's seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this Torah. Let him read it and study its words all his life, so that he may learn to revere his God. Thus he will not act haughtily toward his fellows or deviate from this teaching. Centuries and centuries ago, the Bible understood that it was human nature for a leader to reach for more power. And the best way our ancestors could control those urges was to send their leader to Torah study with a local rabbi. As a rabbi who loves Torah study, join us Wednesdays at noon over Zoom. Of course, this resonates, not just because we believe that study inspires us to become better people, but also because Torah study forces us to encounter the pluralistic voices of Jewish discourse. There's never one opinion about a question. There are always other perspectives to weigh. Torah study also conveys a Jewish truth, that our community changes its mind. We celebrate Passover differently today than 500 years ago. We think differently about God. Our tradition contrasts with the ideological purity of the current moment and serves as a model for leaders on the virtue of changing one's position over time. These values underscore why the biblical author considered Torah study a check on the power of a leader. To what degree are our leaders seeking conversations from different perspectives about the pressing issues of the day? And are we electing leaders willing to move away from their party's ideological rigidity from time to time? Ultimately, this is a question about anava, or humility. Consider the Jewish practice of covering our heads. The custom is rooted in humility, a physical gesture that there is a higher power above us and all around us that we are subservient to. We explicitly humble ourselves before that which is bigger and beyond us. That is an ideal not just for us, but for our leaders to aspire to. A leader who uses fear to get people and institutions to do what they want violates that humility. Because instead of getting others to fear us and be in awe of us, we are taught to foster fear and awe in our relationship with God. The late Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel understood this idea innately when he courageously marched with Dr. King on the road from Selma to Montgomery. He did it in defiance of the state of Alabama, because his awe of God taught him that every human was created in God's image, and that virtue held greater sway than the racism of Alabama's law enforcement establishment. The fissures in our democracy are being aggravated by the way the current administration deploys fear. When people have to move from one state to another because their civil rights are being trampled on, when prominent universities, corporations, and media entities are beholden to an administration that threatens to shut them down for political non-compliance, and yes, our democracy is tarnished when small houses of worship like us have to absurdly promise the Justice Department that we won't pursue DEI initiatives to be eligible for much-needed security grants. I'm aware of the fear I myself hold in sharing these remarks out loud with you today. Fear of government is alive and well at this moment. Rabbi Jill Maderer recently reminded me of the way that Torah responds to such fear. At the very start of the Passover story, we find these words in the middle of Exodus 1. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, spoke to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, saying, when you assist the Hebrew women in childbirth, if it's a boy, kill him, and if it's a girl, let her live. And the midwives, fearing not Pharaoh, but God, did not do as Pharaoh told them. They let the boys live. Shiphrah and Puah teach us that the Passover story begins with a power-hungry leader who deploys fear, and that the basic Jewish response is to courageously resist. At the very moment that our fear peaks and threatens to silence us, that's the moment Torah calls on us to speak and act, because our voices and our nonviolent actions are the only antidotes to a government threatening to rob us of our liberty. We are called to organize, to build like-minded coalitions, and to resist nonviolently like Shiphrah and Puah did, and like Rabbi Heschel did not that long ago. That's how we respond when our democracy is in question. That message is encoded in our understanding of Rosh Hashanah. Our shofar liturgy has long been partially structured around the notion of malchuyot, of celebrating and reaffirming God's sovereignty in our lives and in the world. Rosh Hashanah doesn't just usher in a new year. It challenges us to think seriously about leadership and authority, who we literally and metaphorically bow down to. When a ruler or leader oversteps the bounds of their office with impunity, then an essential contrast makes itself known. If the choice is between inevitably flawed human leaders and a God who is beyond us, our tradition is clear. On Rosh Hashanah, we reaffirm God's malchuyot and our allegiance to the divine ruler of rulers. This morning, we are called to action by a shofar that puts God's sovereignty above party and ruler, but also by the Liberty Bell and its crack, which reminds us of the role that we play in healing our country. A crack, after all, isn't just evidence of something that is broken, it's also a schematic for repair. Or as Leonard Cohen famously put it, ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. May this year of 5786 be filled with peace and not conflict, compassion and not indifference, light and not darkness. May our courage and our kindness be that change, that hope, and that light. And let's say together, Amen.